Hi, I'm Alexander Haberbush, president of the Lex Rex Institute, and as always, nothing in this video constitutes legal advice. So this is going to be our first entry in a new video series that we're starting called Ask an Attorney, where I answer totally unscripted questions from the audience about matters relating to constitutional law or really even law more generally. So if you have any questions that you've always wanted answered about constitutional law, go ahead and ask those questions in the comments below. We do read all of those questions, and who knows, your question may end up on next week's video. So for our first video, I've been asked to talk about my opinion on President Biden's new Supreme Court nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson. Well, I actually have never argued in front of Judge Jackson. To my knowledge, I've not read any of her opinions either. I may have come across them once or twice in my legal research, but I don't always look at who the judge is on those, so I wouldn't have known that I had encountered them. And in the past week since she's been nominated, I have not had an opportunity to read any of her opinions or past work either. So I'm not going to comment on her qualifications as a judge because I don't really know what her qualifications are as a judge. So I'll talk instead about what President Biden said his goals were in picking a nominee to the court. I don't think it's any secret. Biden made it very, very clear that he wanted to find somebody who had a new perspective, a perspective that was different from the other people on the court. And he set out to find somebody that was true of. So, firstly, I don't think he did a very good job finding somebody that has a new perspective. But before I get to that, I want to talk about whether or not that endeavor is one that makes sense when picking a justice. Traditionally, we've always said that justice is blind. That's been an expression that's used for justice. Lady Justice is always depicted with a blindfold. I think I've got a Lady Justice around here somewhere. That might be in the lobby now, but she's always shown with a blindfold on, and she holds scales in front of her, the scales of justice, and the idea is she's not looking at those scales when she's meting out justice to those who need it. Why is that? Well, the idea has always been that judges are supposed to be impartial. They're not supposed to show favoritism or be respecters of person. They're not supposed to voice their opinions in their decisions. They're just supposed to look at the law and then apply the law to a set of facts. Hamilton famously said in the Federalist Papers that justices do not exercise will, they exercise only judgment. And that's traditionally been how the role of a judge has been perceived. At least that's been the goal of a really good judge. So I think it's a little bit misguided to say from the get-go, we're not looking for a judge who's impartial. In fact, we're not even assuming that a judge is going to be impartial. We're looking for one who has a perspective that's different from the others on the court, because that sort of takes for granted that the rest of the judges on the court are also ruling according to what their perspective is. And that may or may not be a problem, but that's very different from the traditional notions of what judges are supposed to do. Now, I know a lot of folks out there are going to say, well, what about psychology? Psychology shows that humans have all kinds of biases that affect their judgments every day, and that they aren't even aware of these biases. That's true, but I think that sometimes when it comes to that sort of thing, we can act like the fact that psychologists are saying something now means that other people were not aware of the same basic idea in the past. Even the ancients were very acutely aware of the fact that human beings have biases. It's written into the Mosaic law of the Old Testament that judges can't be respecters of persons. The law of ancient Rome required judges to act impartially. They were very aware of the fact that people have interests and biases and that these can bleed into your opinions on things, even without you knowing. What the modern psychology ought to do is not make us focus on, our reaction shouldn't be, well, let's stop caring whether or not judges are biased. Our reaction should be, great, we've now got a tool that allows us to more easily identify what our biases are so that we can minimize them and we can have judges that are actually impartial. So, whether or not Biden's objective in finding a new perspective for the court is misguided, that's neither here nor there, because that is what he stated his objective to be. So let's look at whether or not he's actually achieved that in this nominee. Well, first thing I would look at in seeing whether or not people have a different perspective on things is where they're from. And currently, of the 9 justices who are on the court, 7 of them are from states that are on the eastern seaboard. 2 of them are not. Justice Gorsuch is from Colorado, and Justice Breyer is from California. Well, Justice Breyer is the judge who's going to be retiring and that Jackson is nominated to replace. So Justice Jackson is from Florida, also a state that's on the eastern seaboard. So she's actually, in that respect, she's decreasing the diversity of the court from what it was previously. Because previously we had 2 Westerners. If she gets confirmed, we'll have 1. That'll Justice Gorsuch will be the only Westerner on the court. As a lawyer, I can say where somebody is from has a profound impact on the way they interpret the law, not necessarily because it makes them biased in one way or another, but because it gives them experiences that others may not have, particularly as a judge. There are certain issues that really only come up, or at least come up much more commonly, in Western states. These are going to be things like matters pertaining to the Native American reservations. Native American reservations really predominantly only exist in the Western states, and if you look at the history of Supreme Court rulings, Gorsuch has actually already been a swing vote, sided with what's usually perceived as the left wing of the court on a case that pertained to Indian reservations. Also, issues pertaining to water rights. Water rights work very, very differently in Western states than they do in the East. Even just the social demographics are very, very different in the West from the East. I think that because of national news and the internet, we tend to think of American interests as sort of held in common throughout the entire country, but ways of life still differ considerably in the West versus the East. And if you care about representation on the court, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have 8 of the 9 justices come from the eastern seaboard. And really, even though Colorado is considered a Western state, if you look at a map of the U.S., it's actually pretty close to the middle. So that entire western half of the country, we've got, assuming that Justice Jackson ends up getting confirmed, we've got nobody from that part of the country. So I would not call that a fresh perspective. Looking at where she went to school, Judge Jackson went to Harvard Law School. Now, Harvard's a highly ranked school. They're well respected in the legal profession. Currently, 4 justices on the court went to Harvard, and 4 justices on the court went to Yale. Only 1 justice, that's Justice Barrett, who went to Notre Dame, went to a school besides Harvard and Yale. So Justice Jackson would not be increasing diversity in that respect at all. And as a lawyer, I can tell you where you go to law school affects your judicial philosophy, your view of the law substantially. Especially at a school like Harvard, which leans really one direction when it comes to legal interpretation. I would say Yale is a little bit less so. Yale's a little bit more objective. But Harvard has really been pushing pretty hard for one particular view of constitutional interpretation. Now, back earlier in February of this year, President Biden said that he wanted to pick a judge who was part of the quote-unquote mainstream interpretation of the Constitution. I'm not quite sure what that means. That's not really an expression that we use in constitutional circles. I think that certainly the faculty and staff of Harvard is pushing for their particular interpretation to become the mainstream, and with half of the court being Harvard, half of the Supreme Court being Harvard graduates, I think that that's achievable for them. But they tend to lean very much in the direction of what we call a living constitution, as opposed to my perspective of many others, where we would say that we believe in what the Constitution actually says on its face. We believe that the interpretation of the Constitution should be according to what the words of the Constitution are. And where those words are ambiguous, you would look at what somebody at the time it was ratified would have understood those words to mean. Living Constitution says that the Constitution should change and adapt to suit the circumstances and needs at the time. Well, maybe I'm just naive here, but I figure if you go out and ask a group of people, what's the mainstream interpretation of a document, I think it's probably going to be the one that reflects what it says, not the one that makes accommodation for the needs of changing circumstances. Regardless, neither here nor there, Harvard, that is the position that is pushed by Harvard Law School, and Judge Jackson would be a representative of that view. Now, there are hundreds, I think maybe even thousands, of law schools in the United States, and dozens of those law schools are as highly regarded as Harvard and Yale. But those people tend not to get the nominations to the court. Why don't they get those? Well, because, frankly, a lot of it's just sort of that they don't know the right people. Presidents and the lawyers that surround presidents in D.C. tend to be graduates of Harvard and Yale, and they tend to recommend people that they know. And, that might be a little bit funny, because if you're talking about getting new perspectives on a body, you would think that you would look outside the pool of people that your immediate sphere of influence knows. You would think you'd want to look outside of that group. Well, obviously, that's not what happened here. So I would say that no, I don't think that Judge Jackson brings a new perspective in terms of her education. Well, what about her professional experience? So currently, Judge Jackson serves as a judge on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and prior to that, she was a district court judge, also in the D.C. Circuit. Now, I don't know the numbers offhand, but coming from the D.C. Circuit is far and away the most common experience for a nominee to the Supreme Court and for Supreme Court justices. Why is that? Well, for very much the same reasons that they tend to come from Harvard and Yale. It's because presidents work and live in Washington, D.C. So all of their lawyers tend to work and live in Washington, D.C. So the people who are recommending justices to them tend to be people who only know people in Washington, D.C. They've argued before the judges in the D.C. Circuit. They're familiar with how those judges rule on things, and they're recommending people with whom they are familiar. Well, Judge Jackson, again, is somebody who has practiced in the D.C. Circuit. She's been a judge in the D.C. Circuit. So she's from that kind of good old boys network of people who would ordinarily get nominated to the Supreme Court. So, no, I really, those are sort of the three biggies that I would look at, where she's from, where she went to school, and then what she's done in her professional experience. And I would say all three of those are, in one respect, actually diminish the perspective of the court, but are certainly very typical of the existing perspective on the court. Those are the three things that would be relevant to me as a lawyer as far as legal experience and legal perspective is concerned. Obviously, there are other factors that can matter a ton when looking at somebody's experience, and she may bring a fresh perspective on those. I don't really know. But as far as those things are concerned, I don't think she has a fresh perspective at all. So in answer to the question that was asked, I would have to say that Judge Jackson is a very poor pick if President Biden's goal was to pick somebody with a new perspective. Well, that's all I have for today. We'll be doing this again next week, assuming that people like this one. Go ahead and ask your questions in the comments below, and I will be answering those questions next week. Again, nothing in this video constitutes legal advice. And as always, if you do feel so moved, please visit our website. We'll have a link in the description below, and make a contribution on our website. Amounts contributed go directly to the defense of our clients, and really any amount helps. So if you feel moved, please go ahead and do that. Also, if you like this video, go ahead and press like on the video below. I think they got rid of the dislikes, so it'll probably show that everybody liked it, but I guess the higher number is still better. And please subscribe to our channel and click on the bell icon notification below. I don't know what any of that means, but I'm told that that's what you're supposed to do. So I've been asked to say that by my media person, so I'm saying it. But go ahead and please do that. For now, take care. The Lex Rex Institute, as always, is your partner in seeing that the law is upheld and that the law remains the only king in the United States. See you again next week.